The Lord be with you. We're reading the Gospel of Matthew, and as you read the Gospel of Matthew, I forget how many times he says, "This was to fulfill what the prophet said." And to properly understand this, I'm going to give you just hopefully very quickly the right way to look at it and then the wrong ways to look at it. So, when he talks about fulfilling a prophet, what he's talking about is there are these pictures, these patterns, these resonances, these ways that God operates. God keeps playing the same tune over and over again throughout Scripture. And when God plays that tune in Jesus's life, when he repeats that pattern in Jesus's life, uh, when he when Jesus kind of has the same picture or the same resonance that happened before in the Old Testament, Matthew is going to call that a quote unquote fulfillment of prophecy. Okay, it's Jesus repeating the patterns of things like sin and judgment of grace, Jesus repeating the pattern of Israel, who is God's son, and Jesus is God's son. I'll go over, hopefully very quickly, uh, the specifics of how Matthew does this, but I just want to give you the overview that fulfillment of prophecy is patterns or pictures or resonances or tunes that God played in the past, and Jesus is showing the kind of full meaning of that picture or resonance or tune. Okay, so for example, you'll have something like uh, no, I won't do it. I'll do that in a different video. So here's the wrong way, two wrong ways to think about prophecy and fulfillment. So there's two ways that the Enlightenment thinks about prophecy as predictions, and then predictions of the future, and then finding their fulfillment in Jesus. That is, the prophets predicted the future and said, when the Messiah comes, this is going to happen, and then Jesus comes and it happens. Okay. The problem with that is this is a only a slight overstatement, but I'd be willing to back it up. Okay, and this might sound shocking, but just bear with me. In the Old Testament, there are exactly zero predictions of the future. I'm going to say it again to make the point. In the Old Testament, there are exactly zero predictions of the future. What there is in the Old Testament is, and in the New Testament for that matter, what there is prophets, people speaking for God, who are laying out before people God's current purposes and plans and God's future purposes and plans. He's not making predictions. He's saying, hey, this is what God is doing according to his covenant promises, and this is what God's going to be doing based on his covenant promises and purposes and plans. Now, God's plans and purposes are always contingent because, well, God made people to be his image and he trusts people for some odd reason. And so God's plans and purposes are always contingent on human beings. He's always going to fulfill his purposes and plans in his own way, but it's going to be in response to people's faithfulness or rebellion, their obedience or their rejection of him. And so God's plans and purposes are always going to be interweaved with the way people respond. So he's not making predictions of the future. So the wrong way to look at these prophecies and fulfillments, one way is the way non-Christian Bible scholars look at the prophecies as predictions, and they go, "Look at this prophecy. If you look at the prophecy, for example, of Isaiah 7:14, it looks like what Matthew did is he takes these passages from the Old Testament, rips them out of their context, slaps them on Jesus after having invented a story about Jesus so that he can go, oh, look, the virgin shall conceive. And so he invents a story about, Mary being a virgin. Jesus, there's a passage that says, out of Egypt I called my son. And so Matthew goes, "Ooh, I'll invent a story about that." That's the way Enlightenment non-Christian biblical scholars look at prophecy and fulfillment when they think of prophecy wrongly as predictions rather than God's purposes and plans. The other Enlightenment error is when Christians go, "Oh, look at this prediction about Jesus. Uh, Isaiah 7:14, a virgin will conceive and bear a son." And so Matthew rips it out of context and they call it a prediction about Jesus and they go, "Look how it's fulfilled." And if you go and look at some of apologetics works, they have this list of predictions that Jesus fulfilled. Except the problem is there are exactly zero predictions about Jesus in the Old Testament. They're all about God's plans and purposes, which are fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is going to be reenacting and fulfilling Israel's history, God's story. It all comes to culmination, God's purposes and plans. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And if it does not, please talk to me. So we'll we'll have to see. All right, God's peace be with you.